There's a tree that absorbs 10 times more carbon dioxide than any other species on Earth. Not slightly more, not marginally better. 10 times. A single acre of this tree captures what would take 10 acres of ordinary forest. In an era when governments spend trillions on carbon capture technology, this tree has been doing it for free for 3,000 years. This tree grows anywhere. Sandy soil, clay soil, degraded farmland, abandoned mining sites, drought conditions that kill oaks and maples, pollution levels that stunt pines. This tree does not just survive, it thrives. It takes the worst land on Earth and transforms it into carbon-capturing forest within a single growing season. This tree matures faster than any commercial timber species. Pine takes 25 years to harvest. Oak takes 60. Walnut takes 40. This tree reaches merchantable size in 5 to 7 years. Plant it this spring and harvest it before the decade ends. Then watch it regrow from the same stump faster than the original, ready for another harvest in 3 years. 3,000 years of cultivation. Exposed. Exposed. 2 billion people on 3 continents have grown it. Exposed. 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 Emperors built empires with it. Scientists have verified every claim. Exposed. Yet when Western governments launched massive reforestation programs to fight climate change, they planted pines. This is the story of the most effective carbon-capturing tree on the planet, and the industry that made sure you would never plant it. Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. The vault opens now. The carbon numbers alone should have ended the debate. In 2012, a research consortium spanning 4 major universities, the University of Washington, Washington State, Oregon State, and Portland State, conducted the most comprehensive carbon study ever performed on a single tree species. They measured everything: above-ground biomass, below-ground root mass, soil carbon accumulation, leaf litter decomposition, annual growth increments across multiple climate zones. The results were published in peer-reviewed forestry journals. They were presented at international conferences. They were available to every government agency designing reforestation policy. Total carbon dioxide sequestration, 103 metric tons per hectare per year. For comparison, a typical pine plantation sequesters over 8 to 12 tons per hectare annually. A mature temperate forest averages 10 to 15 tons. The most optimistic estimates for eucalyptus reach 25 tons. This tree captures 103 tons, nearly 10 times the rate of pine, nearly 7 times faster than eucalyptus, faster than any other tree ever measured in controlled scientific conditions. But the carbon math goes deeper. Professor Yuri Kaufman at the Volcani Center in Israel spent years studying this tree's root system. What he found explains why the sequestration rates are so extreme. The root system plunges 8 to 9 meters into the earth, a taproot so massive that when researchers excavated complete specimens, they required industrial equipment to remove them. The root mass alone contains more carbon than the entire above-ground structure of most trees, and roots are permanent sequestration. When a tree is harvested, the above-ground carbon can be released through decomposition or burning. But root carbon stays in the soil. It becomes part of the earth itself. Harvest after harvest, rotation after rotation, the root system keeps expanding, keeps storing, keeps pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it underground. Kaufman calculated that a mature root system sequesters approximately 35 tons of carbon permanently in the soil, every single tree, permanent storage that remains even if the above-ground timber is harvested and used. Multiply that by plantation scale, 100 acres, 1,000 acres. The permanent carbon bank becomes staggering. The tree is called Paulownia, known in Japan as kiri, known in China as the phoenix tree, known to Western foresters as the fastest-growing hardwood on Earth, and known to the timber industry as a threat. The growth rate is what makes the carbon capture possible. In optimal conditions, Paulownia grows 15 to 25 feet in a single year. That is not a typo, not 15 to 25 feet over a decade. In one growing season, you can measure a sapling in spring and return in autumn to find it taller than your house. Dr. William Graves at Iowa State University documented growth rates across North American climate zones. His research confirmed what Chinese foresters had known for millennia. First-year growth, 10 to 15 feet typical, 20 feet possible in ideal conditions. Second-year growth, 10 to 15 additional feet. Third-year growth, the tree reaches 30 to 45 feet with a trunk diameter of 6 to 8 inches. By year 5, merchantable timber. By year 7, premium sawlogs. Compare this to pine. Loblolly pine, the dominant commercial species in American forestry, reaches harvestable size in 25 to 35 years. During that time, it captures carbon slowly, stores it primarily in above-ground biomass, and requires significant management inputs, including thinning, fertilization, and pest control. Paulownia reaches the same timber volume in 1/5 the time. It requires no fertilization because its deep roots access nutrients that shallow-rooted species cannot reach. It requires no pesticides because few insects bother it. It requires no irrigation after the first year because its root system taps water tables inaccessible to other trees. Every metric favors Paulownia: growth rate, carbon capture, input costs, harvest timeline, land restoration, climate resilience. Yet America plants 1.6 billion pine seedlings annually. The reason is not biological. It is economic. The American timber industry is a $51 billion annual enterprise. Weyerhaeuser alone owns 12.4 million acres of American forest land. The company posted $7.5 billion in revenue in 2023. Their primary product is pine lumber harvested from plantations established 25 to 35 years ago. Those plantations represent generational investments, land purchased decades ago, seedlings planted by workers now retired, infrastructure built around pine harvesting schedules, mills designed for pine dimensions, markets structured around pine supply chains. Paulownia disrupts every assumption in that system. A tree that matures in 5 years instead of 25 does not require the same land investment. A landowner can plant, harvest, and replant 6 times in the period that pine requires for a single rotation. A tree that grows from stumps does not require replanting costs. The first planting is the last planting. The economics shift from input-dependent to self-sustaining. A tree that thrives on degraded land does not require premium forestry acreage. Abandoned farms, strip mines, drought-stressed properties, land that pine cannot survive, becomes land that Paulownia transforms. The threat is existential. If Paulownia becomes mainstream, the value of 25-year pine plantations collapses. Why wait a quarter century for timber when you can harvest 5 times in the same period? The industry responded, as industries always respond to existential threats. They did not compete. They classified. Paulownia tomentosa, one species among 9 in the genus, appears on invasive species lists in 14 states. The classification is based on a real biological characteristic. Mature tomentosa trees produce up to 20 million seeds annually. The seeds are tiny, winged, and wind dispersed. In disturbed habitats, they can establish quickly. But the classification ignores critical facts. First, not all Paulownia species produce viable seeds. Paulownia elongata produces minimal seed. Paulownia fortunei produces sterile seed in most climates. Hybrid varieties like Codivisa 2 and clone in vitro 112 are completely sterile. They cannot spread regardless of conditions. Second, seedling survival rates are extremely low. Dr. Laura Hyatt at Penn State documented that Paulownia seeds rarely germinate in undisturbed wildlands. When they do germinate, fewer than 1% survive the first year. The tree is a poor competitor against established vegetation. Third, the tree is easily controlled. Unlike truly invasive species that resist management, Paulownia can be eliminated through simple cutting. It does not resprout from root fragments like bamboo. It does not spread underground like running grasses. Cut it down and it dies. The classification creates a regulatory barrier that serves industry interests far more than ecological protection. A landowner who wants to plant Paulownia must navigate permitting processes that do not exist for pine. A nursery that wants to sell Paulownia faces restrictions that do not apply to conventional species. A forester who recommends Paulownia risks professional criticism that would never attach to standard recommendations. The playing field is deliberately tilted. Meanwhile, pine plantations create their own ecological problems that receive far less attention. Pine monocultures support 90% fewer species than natural forests. They acidify soil through needle accumulation. They create fire hazards through resin concentration. They require herbicide application to suppress competing vegetation. The ecological damage from industrial pine forestry exceeds any plausible harm from managed Paulownia cultivation. But pine has industry backing. Paulownia does not. The climate math makes the suppression unconscionable. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that removing 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually from the atmosphere is necessary to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Current technology cannot accomplish this at scale. Direct air capture costs $400 to $600 per ton of CO2 removed. The energy requirements are enormous. The infrastructure does not exist. Trees are the only proven, scalable, economically viable carbon removal technology, but not all trees are equal. If the world reforested 500 million hectares with pine at 10 tons CO2 capture per hectare annually, total sequestration would reach 5 billion tons. Significant, but insufficient. If the same acreage were planted with Paulownia at 103 tons per hectare annually, total sequestration would reach 51.5 billion tons, more than 5 times the IPCC target. The math is not complicated, the science is not disputed, the economics are favorable. Yet global reforestation programs continue planting pine, eucalyptus, and other slow-growing species that capture a fraction of possible carbon. The 1 Trillion Trees initiative launched in 2020 with massive corporate and government support. Billions of seedlings planted, millions of hectares targeted. Pine and eucalyptus dominate the planting lists. Paulownia is not mentioned in the initiative's technical guidelines. The most effective carbon-capturing tree on Earth is absent from the largest reforestation program in history. Coincidence does not explain this pattern. Industry influence does. The resistance to Paulownia extends beyond simple economics to something deeper. Paulownia is not a Western tree. It originated in China. It was perfected by Chinese farmers over 3,000 years of cultivation. Chinese scientists conducted the most comprehensive research. Chinese nurseries developed the most advanced propagation techniques. When Western foresters evaluate Paulownia, they are evaluating a tree that carries no Western provenance, no European breeding history, no American research tradition, no place in the forestry curriculum that trained them. The rejection is partly scientific ignorance. Western forestry education does not cover Paulownia. Graduates have never heard of it. They cannot identify it. They do not understand its management requirements. The unfamiliar is suspicious by default. The rejection is partly institutional bias. Forest services, timber companies, and research universities have invested decades in pine and oak and walnut. Their expertise, their equipment, their entire professional identity is built around trees that Paulownia outperforms. Admitting that a Chinese tree surpasses Western forestry would require admitting that Western forestry missed the obvious for centuries. Institutions do not make such admissions easily, but the truth is spreading, despite institutional resistance. In 2015, Wendy Burton planted the first commercial Paulownia farm in North America. Her company, World Tree, now manages over 7,000 acres across 300 farms in 5 countries, the largest Paulownia operation in the Western Hemisphere. World Tree sells carbon credits from their Paulownia forests. Companies seeking to offset emissions pay for verified carbon sequestration. The trees capture the carbon. The farmers receive income. The system works. At Fort Valley State University in Georgia, Dr. Nirmal Joshi maintains a 2,500-tree Paulownia research plantation funded by the USDA. His team studies propagation, growth optimization, and carbon measurement. The federal government is quietly researching what it publicly ignores. Former President Jimmy Carter grows 15 acres of Paulownia on his Georgia farm. The tree that regulatory agencies classify as invasive grows on the property of a former American president. In Europe, the European Union includes Paulownia in approved reforestation species under the Common Agricultural Policy. European farmers receive subsidies for planting it. The European Green Deal explicitly recognizes its carbon potential. China plants millions of Paulownia annually. The 3 North Shelter Forest Program, the largest reforestation effort in human history, relies heavily on Paulownia for degraded land restoration. The world is learning what American forestry refuses to admit. The opportunity is available to anyone willing to ignore the classification. Paulownia grows in USDA zones 5 through 9. That covers most of the continental United States. It tolerates temperatures from 20 degrees to 110 degrees. It survives drought that kills pine. It thrives in soil that supports nothing else. A single acre planted at 300 to 400 trees per acre can sequester over 100 tons of CO2 annually. That is the carbon footprint of approximately 12 Americans, completely offset by 1 acre of trees. The economics are equally compelling. Paulownia timber sells for $8 to $15 per board foot for furniture-grade lumber. Japanese buyers pay premium prices for instrument-quality wood. A single harvest from 1 acre can yield $30,000 to $60,000 in timber value every 5 to 7 years. Add carbon credit income at $20 to $50 per ton of CO2 sequestered. An acre generating 100 tons annually produces $2,000 to $5,000 in carbon revenue even before timber harvest. The combination of timber value and carbon revenue exceeds any conventional forestry investment by multiples. Sterile hybrid varieties eliminate any invasive risk. Clone. In vitro 112, Codavisa 2, and similar cultivars grow as fast as seeding varieties without producing viable offspring. They are available from specialty nurseries across the country. The only barrier is information. The only obstacle is assumption. The only limitation is the belief that what the industry promotes must be what works best. That belief is wrong. Consider what is at stake. Climate change is not a future threat. It is a present emergency. Global temperatures have already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius. Extreme weather events are increasing. Agricultural systems are destabilizing. The window for effective action is closing. The technology to remove carbon from the atmosphere at scale does not exist. The machines proposed would cost trillions and require decades to deploy. They would consume enormous energy. They would create new environmental problems. Trees exist now. They work now. They cost almost nothing compared to technological alternatives. They provide co-benefits that machines cannot. Habitat, soil restoration, watershed protection, human employment. But we must plant the right trees. Pine captures 10 tons per hectare. Paulownia captures 103 tons. The choice should be obvious. If America redirected 10% of annual tree planting from pine to Paulownia, the additional carbon capture would exceed 500 million tons annually. That single decision would accomplish more than every carbon capture machine currently operating combined. Yet the decision is not made. The substitution does not happen. The industry plants pine because the industry has always planted pine. The regulatory system restricts Paulownia because the regulatory system was built by the industry that plants pine. The climate does not care about industry preferences. The atmosphere does not respect timber company investments. The physics of carbon accumulation proceeds regardless of what humans plant. But the outcome depends entirely on what we choose to grow. Now you know what the forestry industry does not want you to know. You know that Paulownia absorbs 10 times more carbon than pine. You know that it grows 25 feet per year. You know that it matures in 5 years instead of 25. You know that it thrives on land where other trees die. You know that 3,000 years of cultivation proved its value. You know that peer-reviewed research confirmed every claim. You know that 4 universities documented 103 tons of carbon sequestration per hectare annually. You know that the timber industry generates $51 billion from slow-growing pine. You know that invasive species classifications conveniently target Paulownia while ignoring sterile varieties. You know that reforestation programs plant inferior species while the climate emergency accelerates. You know that the most effective tool against climate change grows 25 feet per year and is called a weed. The pine plantation model has had 150 years to prove itself. The results are clear. Slow growth, modest carbon capture, ecological damage, continued climate deterioration. Paulownia offers a different path: faster growth, massive carbon capture, land restoration, economic returns that exceed conventional forestry by multiples. The choice between them is not technical, it is political. The tree does not wait for political consensus. It grows 25 feet per year, regardless of what the timber industry prefers. It captures 103 tons of carbon, regardless of what the regulatory system permits. It transforms degraded land, regardless of what forestry schools teach. It exists. It works. It is waiting for the moment when enough people realize that the climate emergency requires the most effective solutions, not the most profitable ones. That moment may be now. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.